The story begins in Arizona, right on the United States and Mexico border. This is where we meet Jim. He is a retired Marine sniper, living a quiet life on his ranch with his loyal dog, Jack. One day, Jim is driving around the desert and spots a group of illegal immigrants crossing the border. He takes out his radio and reports them to the Border Patrol. But as he drives away, he finds one young guy lying on the ground, injured and dehydrated. Jim brings him some water, saves his life, and waits until the ambulance is on the way. Now, let me tell you about Jim's struggle. Since his wife passed away from cancer, he is drowning in massive medical debt. Suddenly, a bank representative arrives at his house with a terrible notice. He tells Jim, "Look, you have 90 days, or we will sell your ranch at an auction." Jim points to a nearby hill with tears in his eyes and says, "That is where I buried my wife a year ago. I am not a thief, just give me some time." But the bank guy is cold and says, "Unfortunately, we cannot give you more time." Jim is desperate to save his home. He goes to a lumber mill looking for a job, but the manager says, "Sorry, Jim, you are too old for this heavy labor." He even sells his cattle, but the money is not enough. That night, Jim goes to a bar to forget his problems. There, he meets Sarah, his stepdaughter, who works for the Border Patrol. She thanks him for helping them catch the migrants, but she warns him. She says, "Jim, you cannot live alone in that dangerous desert. It is full of drug cartels." Jim breaks down and tells her, "They are taking my home, and the only person who gave my life value is already gone." Meanwhile, across the border in Mexico, we meet a young boy named Miguel and his mother, Rosa. Suddenly, Rosa gets a terrifying phone call from her brother, Carlos. He screams, "Take Miguel and run right now. The cartel is coming to kill you." You see, Carlos stole a massive bag of money from the cartel and hid it with Rosa. A few minutes later, the cartel captures Carlos and tortures him. Their brutal leader, Mauricio, takes Carlos's phone and sees that he called Rosa. Mauricio smiles and tells his men, "She has our money, let us go hunt her down." Rosa finds a smuggler to help her and Miguel cross into America. But on the way, she spots Mauricio's car. The smuggler panics and says, "We must go back or we will die." But Rosa stands firm and says, "I am not going back. We must finish this." The terrified smuggler points to a hole in the border fence and says, "Okay, run through that hole. I am saving myself." Rosa and Miguel run for their lives, but Mauricio spots them and speeds up. While crossing the fence, Rosa hurts her leg. Right at that second, Jim is driving by and slams his brakes just before hitting Miguel. Jim looks up and sees the cartel trucks stopping right in front of him. He grabs his radio to call Border Patrol, but Rosa begs him, "Please do not. They will send me back and the cartel will kill us." She offers him money, but Jim is totally confused. Finally, he calls the patrol and gives his location. Mauricio steps out of his truck and yells, "Old man, hand over the woman and the boy." Jim draws his weapon and stands firm. He says, "They do not belong to you. They are on American soil now, and the police are on the way." Mauricio laughs, his men draw their guns, and a violent shootout begins. Jim shows us why he is a legendary sniper. He fires with perfect military precision, dropping 2 cartel guys instantly. While the others take cover to reload, Jim yells at Rosa and Miguel, "Get in the truck, fast." Jim speeds away, but Mauricio is crazy. He jumps and clings to the back of the truck. During this chaos, a stray bullet hits Rosa in the stomach. Suddenly, Mauricio attacks Jim through the window, trying to strangle him. Jim slams the brakes hard, throwing Mauricio off the truck, and escapes. They drive to a safe distance, but Rosa is bleeding out. She looks at Jim and whispers, "If my son goes back, they will kill him." She gives him a paper with her family's address in Chicago and begs him, "Please protect my boy." Then, she closes her eyes and passes away. Mauricio goes back to his trucks, only to find out that one of the dead guys was his own brother. He goes completely insane with anger and swears to get brutal revenge on Jim. Meanwhile, Jim hands Miguel over to the police. Sarah arrives and tells Jim, "This is a dangerous cartel. Stay away from this." Jim asks what will happen to the kid, and she says he will go to a shelter and then get deported back to Mexico. Jim talks to another officer who says, "The kid blames you. He thinks if you did not stop them at the fence, his mother would be alive." Jim feels an absolute punch of guilt. In the morning, he looks at his wife's photo and then looks at the back seat of his truck. He finds the bag Rosa left behind, full of cash. He thinks, "Wow, I can save my ranch." But his conscience screams. He remembers Rosa's dying words, makes a sharp U-turn, and decides to fulfill his promise. Jim sneaks into the police shelter, gets 5 minutes with Miguel, and tells him, "We need to leave. You are not safe here." Miguel follows him without a word. They slip past the guards, jump into the truck, and hit the road. But the cartel is watching from the border, and they spot them. Jim drives straight to his ranch to pack his weapons and clothes. But Miguel panics, runs out of the truck, and hides in the rocks. Jim runs after him, totally furious, and yells, "Where are you going, kid? Do you want to die? They want to kill you, don't you understand?" He brings him back, and they start the long road trip to Chicago. While driving, Jim tries to talk to the boy using some Spanish words, but Miguel stays completely silent. Meanwhile, the cartel arrives at Jim's ranch. They find it empty, so Mauricio takes Jim's Marine Medal of Honor, takes the bank notice, and they burn the whole house to the ground. Back to the road trip, Jim stops at a diner, and Miguel finally eats until he is full. Then, they stop at a gas station, and Jim buys an old paper map. Miguel takes a pen and circles Chicago. But guess what? Mauricio's tech guy tracks Jim's credit card at that exact gas station. Mauricio arrives at the store, threatens the clerk, watches the security camera, and kills her before chasing Jim again. Jim stops at a local mechanic because his fuel tank is leaking from a bullet hole. The mechanic patches it up temporarily and tells them to rest for the night. At the diner, Miguel finally talks to Jim in perfect English. He says he learned it at school because his mother wanted a good education for him. The next morning, they hit the highway again. Suddenly, a police car pulls Jim over. The officer checks Jim's weapon licenses and then asks Jim to step into the police car so he can talk to the boy alone. Jim sits in the police car but realizes the officer is just stalling and looking at the road. Jim gasps. He realizes this cop is corrupt and waiting for the cartel. The cop draws his gun, but Jim's dog, Jack, attacks him heroically. Jim jumps the cop. They have a brutal fist fight, and Jim knocks him unconscious. Jim grabs his keys and flees. Minutes later, Mauricio arrives, finds the failing cop, and executes him on the spot. Then, he finds the paper map Miguel dropped, with Chicago circled on it. Mauricio calls his gang in Chicago and says, "Lock down all entrances to the city." Jim knows his original guns are gone, so he goes to a gun shop and buys new weapons cash in hand. Sarah calls Jim again, crying, "Jim, Mauricio is coming to kill you both. Turn the boy in." But Jim refuses and says, "I will not abandon a dying mother's wish. My wife would want me to save this kid." Sarah is deeply moved by his bravery, so she decides to lie to the police to cover for him. Jim and Miguel check into a cheap motel, paying cash. Miguel looks at Jim and says, "When we get to Chicago, we will buy hot dogs together." Jim feels a heavy heart because he knows the danger. In the middle of the night, the dog starts barking. Jim looks out the window and sees the cartel torturing the motel owner. Jim wakes up Miguel and they escape through the window, hiding in the dark woods. Jim tells Miguel to run to the truck while he finds the dog. But before the cartel leaves, Jack runs out and barks fiercely at them. Without any mercy, Mauricio draws his gun and shoots Jack dead right in front of Jim. Jim is completely heartbroken. He carries his loyal dog to the truck, they drive away, and bury him. Jim is so angry and guilty. He yells at Miguel, "This is my fault. I am taking you to the police." But Miguel snaps back, "I know about the money in your bag. You just want the cash." Miguel runs away down the road, but Jim convinces him to get back in. Jim takes him to a small church to hold a funeral for his mother. The priest looks at Jim and says, "His mother must have trusted you deeply to give you her child." These words hit Jim's heart. He calls Sarah and says, "I am taking the boy all the way to Chicago." That night, Jim and Miguel take the cartel's money bag and throw it into the fire, destroying the curse completely. The next day, they finally reach the outskirts of Chicago, but the cartel is waiting for them and a high-speed chase begins. Jim manages to outsmart them, causing their trucks to crash into the trees. But suddenly, Jim's engine overheats and dies right in the middle of the road. Jim parks his truck sideways, grabs his sniper rifle, and waits calmly. As the first cartel car speeds towards him, Jim fires a crazy headshot right through the windshield, flipping the car over. The remaining henchmen jump out and start a heavy shootout. Jim and Miguel run for cover inside an abandoned barn. Jim slips through the shadows and takes down another henchman, but suddenly, Mauricio corners them, holding Miguel hostage with a gun to his head. Mauricio laughs and forces Miguel to hold the gun, pointing it at Jim's chest. He wants the boy to pull the trigger. Jim looks into Miguel's eyes and gives him a silent nod. Miguel remembers his training. He quickly ejects the magazine, but one bullet is still inside. It fires and hits Jim right in the stomach. A brutal, bloody fistfight breaks out between Jim and Mauricio. Mauricio pulls out a knife and stabs Jim multiple times. Both men fall to the ground, bleeding heavily. Miguel picks up the gun and points it at Mauricio. Mauricio yells, "Shoot me, avenge your mother." But Jim screams, "Don't do it, Miguel. There is no honor in killing." Miguel lowers the gun and gives it to Jim. Jim fires the final shot, putting Mauricio down for good. As Mauricio takes his last breath, he gives Jim his Marine medal back. Jim leaves the gun with one bullet next to him and walks out. A second later, a gunshot echoes from the barn. Mauricio chose to end it on his own terms. Jim and Miguel hitch a ride to the address in Chicago. Before saying goodbye, Jim gives Miguel his Marine medal as a keepsake. Miguel knocks on the door, and his family opens it, crying with tears of joy. When Miguel turns around to introduce Jim, Jim is already gone. An exhausted Jim gets on a public bus, sitting by the window. Covered in sweat and bleeding heavily from his stomach, he slowly closes his eyes, leaving his fate completely unknown. Did he survive, or did he take his final breath? And that is how our thrilling movie ends. Don't forget to smash that like button and leave a comment down below. Do you think Jim survived, or was that the end of his journey? Follow my Instagram for suggestions, check out our Facebook page, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for the latest recaps. Thank you for your legendary support, and see you in the next video. Bye.